41. Oops.
How much that takes up on YouTube?
Yeah.
It's just Sebastian Stan.
I mean, if they could make it a little longer, but like listen to the shortness of it, it's been a little.
I just want to phone it back, put it back. The man needs to look like a greasy rat. A greasy
That
rat.
was recorded, by the way. I don't think they could probably hear you over there.
No, but you like also kind of right in front of the mic.
Yeah,
So,
kind
I'm
of, maybe. I don't know.
I've noticed that I sound mumbled.
Yeah.
I thought,
But
Anyways.
today we are doing medieval Europe, very different from what we've been talking about this morning. This is a bit of a longer section. The others are quite a bit shorter, but that's because this one covers more than like one people group. Covers a few. So here's a little map to give you an idea of the different regions that we're talking about. We are going to be talking about, starting off today, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, or Hiberno-Saxon, more prior to Christianity, when there were the warlords in charge, and they're considered barbarians. We will kind of, sort of, today be talking about the Frankish Empire, which will, prior to the Frankish Empire, be known as the Holy Roman Empire. Focusing mostly on Carolinian art and the art of the Ottonians we followed. And then we will not so much get into this area because we kind of talked about it yesterday with Islamic art. That's kind of where we're picking up when Islam is still in charge of Spain. And of course, over here is Byzantine, which is still in existence at this point. So we're kind of going back in time a little bit for today's section because we need to talk about Hiberno-Saxon art pretty much as the main reason for that. I forgot to hit screen record, hang on. Or not screen record, but like screen share. So the recording actually sees the screen instead of just me talking. So, like I said, we're starting off with the art of the warlords from the Hiberno-Saxon, English, Ireland, Scotland area. Before we kick off with some more Christian art, because yes, we got a day's break and now we're going to go back into it, and that's where we're going to be for a long time. Yeah. But prior to the spread of Christian art and Christianity into the rest of Europe, they did have their own art style. We're thinking today of the time of like Beowulf. Anyone read Beowulf?
Yeah.
I did not get the pleasure of reading it. I am the only person in this room who hasn't. Yeah.
I know.
it's interesting, but also
It's interesting. I've read the like snippet version.
it's actually not like supposed to be a story. A lot of
Yeah.
their stuff is oral.
Yeah.
So someone had to memorize that
Mhm.
story.
I know. Yeah. That's a lot of the ancient stories, though. Most of them were oral until someone finally wrote them down. We'll talk about something that has to do with the Bible that's very similar later on today. But yeah. Most of the art that we have from these people were status symbol items like jewelry, expensive things, so more luxury art than like, this is a sculpture. They didn't have so much of that. I mean, they probably did, it's just we don't have it left. What we do have of these people is mostly found in like burials, which is why we find luxury items, because people wanted to be buried with their nice stuff, which we still do today, so it's not quite uncommon. But yeah. That takes us into already our first object. This is a fibulae. Fibulae would have been worn as clasps to hold up garments, originally from the Greeks to hold up like their toga-like garments and clasp them together. But it had already spread at this point up into places like England and Ireland, and became a popular item and status symbol if you were able to purchase such a object. This one obviously made of very precious metals. It is silver gilt, so silver with gilt gold over top, and inlay of garnets, a very precious stone, and other precious stones in it as well. So this would have been owned by a very wealthy female member of the society, as fibulae were for women and their dresses. And they're, of course, the same, a set of two. Now, the interesting thing on this is the decorative pattern. Besides the fact that there's a lot of filigree going on here, which is a common theme with Hiberno-Saxon art, is that ornate filigree, it also has zoomorphic forms. That is another common theme with Hiberno-Saxon art, that zoomorphic form. Now, does anyone know what zoomorphic means? It's a fun word we don't say.
Isn't it like in the curvature of the milk?
Zoom, something with animals,
Oh.
yes, it's an animal-like form. So like, it's supposed to be an animal, but it doesn't look like an animal, but it is an animal kind of thing. Yeah. Up here, we see a eagle. This is an eagle. That's an eagle, folks. Yep. I found this very interesting. This is a fish.
A fish,
I
okay.
suppose not. Like, what-
This is a fish. It's an upside down fish, and that's an eagle. The rest of it is not an animal. It's just filigree. Yeah. This is a fun little thing that I did with the Hiberno-Saxon art, was to try and find the animals. As most of it has animals. Yeah, it's like I Spy, but the animals don't look like animals, but they're there somewhere. It's fun. It also makes their art really interesting and unique. We haven't talked about any other culture at all that did anything like this. So solely something that was done by the Hiberno-Saxon people. I also really appreciate the detail that they were able to get with all of their metal works. Most of the objects that we are talking about from them are metal, which shows off their craftsmanship. Now, found in 1939 in Suffolk, England, was the Sutton Hoo burial ship. Thanks to that ship finding in 1939, thanks to a metal detector, we have a whole bunch of stuff inside of that ship, and that ship alone, with a purse cover, which we're going to look at in a second, a gold belt buckle, which is in your book if you're curious to see that one, 10 silver bowls, a silver plate, and 40 gold coins. Those coins, because I was listening to a podcast about one of the things, I listen to podcasts all the time. Those coins showcased different rulers of the Roman Empire from that time. Well, not Roman Empire, but the Holy Roman Empire, that Rome. Different Rome, but the Holy Roman Empire. And it showed kind of like 4 of the different Holy Roman emperors from the time, kind of giving us a juxtaposition of when we can date this. If you are curious for that date, it's on Google, it's not in your book, which is why I didn't have the date down. The date will be on the object that we're about to look at though. The 2 silver spoons are the ones that I pulled first. They are of Salos and Paulos. I'm betting you can probably figure out who they are. Paul. So Christian imagery did exist in Hiberno-Saxon. That is because Christians are slowly but surely, in missionary format, making their way up into the England area. Some of these people are being converted. Not all of them are quite open to it. What show am I thinking of? Some show. Something to do with Vikings. It's not Vikings, but it's a different show that's like Vikings. So there are a lot of wars taking place. The Vikings are kind of trying to take over this area. It's not really working. They're trying to Christianize those barbaric people, but they're not quite open to it. Eventually, all of them will become Christians. Probably. They might be converted to get people off their backs. I don't know. That purse cover, like I mentioned, we would see that first. It has 7 cloisonne plaques. Cloisonne plaques are these guys. Cloisonne just means that it is a raised kind of facet, and inside of that you can pour in melted glass or other metals into the openings. So they made the golden cloisonne area raised, and inside of that they were able to pour in the enamel. So here is just a cloisonne shape with filigree, another cloisonne shape with filigree. This is an animal, this is an animal, this is a human with two animals. We'll talk about those in a second. And it is, of course, surrounded with more cloisonne and enamel. So once again, very zoomorphic forms used. It's an organic pattern design in most of the cloisonne forms. This is going to end up becoming later on known as the Celtic knot kind of pattern. Of course, not just characteristic of the Celts, but it is pretty characteristic of the region. And it is 7.5 inches long, if you're wondering the size. So here, once again, we have another bird, but below the bird is a duck. Quack, quack. This is like a hawk with the beak and its curve, you can probably tell. And over here we have two wolf-like or bear-like creatures on each side of a human. And I forget what these are. They're something, some sort of a lion, cat-like animal, I can't remember. Sorry. It's kind of hard to figure out what these things are, and if you don't write it down, you're probably not going to remember it. But I do remember the duck, because it's kind of interesting to think that they were combined into one image to make it look more like it's a pattern than an animal, which is pretty much how these people did their art. They would make their animals, they're in there, but they don't look like animals. They look like just patterns. Oh, I didn't include the spoons. I told myself to put the spoons in there. Why didn't I include the spoons? Dang it. They're in your book. I'm sorry. I had to be picky and choosy on this one because there was a lot of stuff. This is from a different region, though. This is from the Vikings, not like Hiberno-Saxon people, but the people that were trying to conquer them. The Vikings. The Vikings did spread far and wide. They even made it to North America before Columbus did, Nova Scotia. So we do have some things from them, but they were a little bit more nomadic. They did occasionally settle down into regions where they conquered, but they were more like, let's go and pillage and then go home. Pillage home, pillage home. Later on, they did set up settlements. But yeah, because of that, we don't have too much, but we do have some of their wooden ships. Yeah, which is what they're most well known for anyways, is their wooden ships that usually had some sort of a ferocious animal on them somewhere along the lines to scare off the people that they're invading. And this is part of a ship. This ship was a burial ship for 2 females. It did not burn. Of course, on a ship would have been a whole bunch of precious objects as well, just like the Sutton Hoo ship. We don't know who the 2 women are. 2 important females from the society, who knows? But it's another great example of them combining animal imagery with a lot of organic patterns and motifs. These patterns and motifs will be adopted by the Christians in that region later, which is why I'm kind of emphasizing it right now.
What animal is that?
Oh, who knows? It looks like a bear to me, but it didn't specify.
Lion, tiger, bear, all
Yeah.
all.
And this particular ship, the Oseberg ship, it has more than just this carving on it. It has quite a few different animals. But I think it looks like a bear. It did not say. Otherwise, I probably would have mentioned it. Now, Hiberno-Saxon art using Christianity. So eventually, when the Christian missionaries do go to this region, they start using some of the art styles in that region that already existed, but pairing it with Christian icons and Christian imagery to try and educate and sophisticate the barbarians who are illiterate. So I think one of you guys in your, no, it was like 2 of you in your quiz last week mentioned that a lot of Christian iconography exists because the majority of people are illiterate at this time. We're going to see that become quite proliferate in the coming moments. Them using images to tell stories and narratives. They even start making books of them. And yeah, they're going to use those books with pictures. It's basically a picture book to educate people and bring them to, well, enlightenment. I brought my umbrella today, but it's not started raining yet.
Not till like 11 and 12.
I know. I thought I saw that when the class is done, it'll probably be raining. I brought an umbrella, so I'm ready. I even went back inside to get my umbrella because I forgot it. Anyway, continuing on, you can see first glance some of the similarities between the art we just talked about and this, the Christian version. Which is why I spent so much time on the other one, even though I didn't need to. Just hit it home. So Hiberno-Saxon art that is Christian will fuse those pagan motifs with Christian imagery, which you see here in this illuminated manuscript. Illuminated manuscripts are going to be really important. Well, not really important. They're going to get annoying, honestly. I'm annoyed with them. I'm sick of writing. They all have these ridiculously long titles. I'm sick of writing it. I didn't even include the dimensions because it was just like, yeah, no. It's the dimension of a page. So I'm sure you can imagine that. But they use these illuminated manuscripts, like I mentioned, to show the illiterate people, well, Christianity. Most people could not read. It was very rare for people to read. There was writing in these books, but they also included a lot of these pictures. This is an image paper. They also had something called carpet pages in these books. The carpet pages literally just have patterns on them. There's nothing else. It's just a pattern. We'll look at a carpet page later. And of course, most of these illustration pages would have been introductions into the actual Bible chapter, which was writing. So, picture, chapter, carpet page. Picture, chapter, carpet page. They added some pictures in between in the reading too sometimes to illustrate the story. This is St. Matthew. Later on, St. Matthew will have a specific symbol associated to him. This is not that symbol, but this is the early version of St. Matthew, of course, leading into the book of Matthew from the Bible. And around St. Matthew's, of course, the usual organic pattern that, well, this region is known for, combining the two. There was something else I was supposed to say about illuminated. Oh, now I remember. So, the Bible, it's really long, right? Crazy long. Most monasteries would not actually have an entire Bible. They would just have books, some of the books, like Matthew or John. Not many had an entire Bible because you had to copy it all by hand. It takes a long time. It was very, very rare for them to have a whole Bible. So keep that in mind going forward, that most of these books, like the Book of Duro, is just a couple of chapters. Well, I say chapters, but like a couple of the books from the Bible, like Matthew or John, not the whole thing. And that's gonna be like that for a very long time until the printing press happens, which is not going to happen in this class. So I'm going to preface with that because we are going to be seeing a lot of illuminated manuscripts. A lot of them, I hate them. I really do. I liked them at the beginning because this is cool. This is a carpet page. This is cool. But now I hate them. Yeah. This is the Lindisfarne Gospel. This is one of the carpet pages from the Lindisfarne Gospel. Located, well, found from Northumbria, England. It's still in England today. Most of these also are tempera on vellum. That's going to be a common theme throughout illuminated manuscripts. So there is going to be a point in time when I stop typing that too, because it's all the same thing. Tempera paint on vellum paper. This particular gospel of the Lindisfarne Gospel had several different carpet pages. The carpet pages all included this really unique foliage design. This is just the cross-inscribed carpet page. I think it's probably the most aesthetically pleasing one to look at. It does contain zoomorphic forms. You can hunt for those if you want to. I did not spend time looking in this one. This is really a nice buy. Oh, where's Waldo? There's Seattle. But it is really interesting, the intricate maze-like texture of all of these knots together and using the different colors to kind of emphasize this cross here. So this cross is of course outlined in red, but the colors inside the cross juxtapose the colors outside of the cross. Their book described it as very cool toned. I would agree, kind of. Really the only warm tone color in it is that red that outlines the cross, making it really stand out. The rest of them are a bit cooler tones, making them recede a little bit. So whoever designed this was quite knowledgeable in aesthetic design and color. And once again, this was all done by hand, which is extremely impressive because I would have lost myself in this maze making this somewhere along the line. But yes, carpet pages, they're quite intricate and I like them. There's a good chunk of them that are about like this from this region. Now, another page from that same book, the Lindisfarne Gospel. This also shows St. Matthew, but with his actual symbol that he's known for later, which is this guy here. He's known for like a falcon bird or angel, something with wings. So that's his symbol. This is, of course, St. Matthew himself. And if you're wondering who's peeking behind the curtain, most people assume it is Moses telling him what to write here. Yeah, he looks creepy though. He's kind of peeking down behind the curtain. He doesn't have a body down here. This is going to become the normal composition for, what are those guys called? The evangelists of the Gospels. All four of them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are going to be depicted in this seated position on a stool, hunched over with a stylus and paper. It's just their symbol. They're known to be hardworking. Some of them will show them with a furrowed brow. This one is obviously not one of them. He looks quite peaceful here. We'll look at a different one in a second. It's not. But the thing that I like to point out here is the quote. I'm trying to make this sound as like highfalutin as possible, but like it's the quote. First off, I love that blue color. It's like my favorite color, blue. But that's not important. The important thing is that the artist did a repetitive pattern of lines that is going to become characteristic of this time period all the way through the Gothic era with these illuminated manuscripts. They're going to have these repeated patterns of folds. This is not realistic. That does not look realistic, but it shows he's wearing something. It does its purpose. I also think this one's really interesting because he used red as a shadow. We kind of saw that in the Rublev painting of the three angels. He used the blue garment with orange shadows. We're seeing it again here, very interesting color choices. True color choices, heck no. Blue does not create red. But this is a cool looking toga. Not a toga, but yeah, it looks cool. The blue hair, yeah, I know. The blue hair. Every single saint, well, not saint, evangelist. I always get all these guys mixed up. Apostles, saints, evangelists. Yeah. Evangelists will have their own symbol, but we're going to pretty much just focus on Matthew's from here on out because I just chose pictures of Matthew. Didn't want to mix everyone up. So we will see different versions of Matthew from here on out. But it's a very flat depiction. There is not really any depth. It's like they tried to create depth with the stool. But if you notice, this one kind of goes this way and the bar on the bottom goes this way. So it's not correct linearly. Towards the end of the Gothic era, it will become slightly more accurate as we get into the early Renaissance period. Now, something else that this region is known for are their high crosses. When Christianity spreads, just like with Rome, they start using different ways to bury their dead versus burning them. They bury them in cemeteries, usually with some sort of a grave marker. In this region, the popular grave marker was the high cross or Celtic cross, is what I learned it as. This thing is huge. It is 18 feet high. Big. It's all one piece of sandstone. Not all of these Celtic crosses or high crosses would have these register reliefs. That's kind of rare. But this one does have those reliefs. In the center is Christ. Of course, Christ is going to be the central figure in most Christian art because Christ. And he is surrounded by his mother and some of his closest apostles like John. And then, of course, around him are scenes of, well, the Last Judgment. He's weighing souls. Because that's a positive image when you die. It is going to be a popular theme in Christian art, the weighing of souls. That is the process of, well, Christ judging whether or not you get to go to heaven or hell. That does take us into Visigothic and Mozarabic art. But before we get in, what did you guys think of all of that Hiberno-Saxon art? Do you like the Warlord version, the Christian version? What was your favorite thing?
Warlord.
I like the Warlord one. I think it's more interesting.
Yeah.
Because no one else did that.
And it's
Cool.
like close to their culture, so like you
Yeah.
get to look at that,
Yeah.
and then you get to like, it's just same thing
I have
being
a-
response for the Christian stuff.
Yeah, I have a feeling it has to do with like the other. That as human beings, it's a theory. It's a philosophy theory that humans are obsessed with the other or the exotic. We are less familiar with them than we are the Christian art. Therefore, we are more interested in it, which I wouldn't lie because I really liked the Islamic portion yesterday, and I am not as familiar with the Islamic. It is the other for me versus Christian. So there is some weight to that theory sometimes. It sparked when people were colonizing Africa, if you're wondering when that theory came about. Yeah, an interesting topic. Yeah, I just thought of randomly when you said something. You said something and it made me think of it. So we are going to kind of talk about Spain. If you remember back to that picture, there was a little itty bitty sliver in the northern portion of Spain. That is not Arabic. It was in red. So kind of Spain, but not really Spain, part of Spain. We'll talk about part of Spain. So after the fall of Rome, many invaders, of course, take over. In Spain, one of those invaders that takes over that particular northern portion is the Visigoths, who sound really, really cool. Their name does anyways, but they are Christian. They weren't originally Christian, but they did quickly, right after taking over Spain, convert to Christianity. So we're going to see some more Christian art. If you remember, there are Muslims living there. I mean, we just talked about that yesterday. So this is going to be also touching on Christians that are living in that Arabic region or Muslim region, as they're right next door. It makes sense that there's going to be some Muslims in the Visigoth region and there's going to be some Christians in the Muslim region. They're neighbors. The Christians that existed in the Muslim portion of Spain are known as Mozarabics. It's a fun name that I've never heard before. To be honest, I hadn't heard of them. This is a new one. But yeah, it's more Christian art. But thinking that it is inside of, well, a Muslim region is probably going to be pretty heavily influenced by that. Starting off in the northern region with the Visigoths, we have Baños de Cerdos, also known as San Juan Bautista's Cathedral. It is very small, especially in comparison to some of the other churches we're going to be looking at today. It does incorporate horseshoe arches from the Muslims. Remember, we are right next door to them, so that makes sense. It is also in a random, well, not really random, it's a basilica. It's a rectangle, it's a basilica. There's not much going on. It does predate the Muslim conquest by a hair, but there are Muslims in that region. This is just, I don't know, this is a little side area that happens that we gotta talk about. There's not much to it. Sorry, there's nothing more I can talk about this one. It's a rectangle with a nave and an aisle on each side, and it has a horseshoe arch entrance. You should be glad this is the least amount of vocabulary you have on an architectural building from now on. Okay, they also had their own illuminated manuscripts, very heavily influenced from, well, you remember the one from yesterday that showed the interior and exterior at the same time? Yeah, this does the same thing. So from almost the same region too, that one we talked about yesterday was from, well, Alhambra, Cordoba region of Spain. This one is also from Spain. But here we have the exterior and interior at the same time. This one is not quite as decorative, with showing the differences between the rooms, like yesterday that had different patterns for every room. This one doesn't quite do that. They changed some of it up a little bit, but it's not quite as detailed. Also, the figures are not quite as hashed out as figures from yesterday. But this is an example of Mozarabic art from that region. And of course, it is very similar to the Muslim paper painting that we saw yesterday. It was a book too. Yeah. Not an illuminated manuscript. This one's an illuminated manuscript. That shows two scribes in a monastery working on copying text. They're down here in the library. There's a woman working in the kitchen down here. Of course, there's different ladders to different levels. And you might notice some Muslim architectural motifs in this building as well, such as the arch. That was it. Like I said, it was a very short little snippet section, but there is Christian art that's happening in Spain with those Christians that are living there. We are going to next be moving on into the Holy Roman Empire, that Frankish region that we looked at that was in orange on that map, also known as Carolingian art. It was founded in, well, not really, the Holy Roman Empire existed before. It was the remnants of the Western Hemisphere of Rome, so not Byzantine Rome, but the other part of Rome that kind of got kicked out and left on its own too. Good luck, guys. Charlemagne in year 800 demanded, literally he demanded, that the Pope crown him as Emperor of Rome, thus beginning the Holy Roman Empire. And then he gifted the Pope a bucket, and it began the War of the Buckets. And I'm not joking, that is a thing. You can Google that if you want to. It's a fun one. There's a little video on it. I almost included it, but then I was like, no, you don't need to know this for this class, but it is interesting. Yeah. So he is the one that coins the term Carolingian period. And he basically considers this, he demands to be crowned king. He starts the Holy Roman Empire. He is the new emperor of Rome. He is starting the new Rome, and he considers this to be the first renaissance of Rome. So he's basically trying to make Rome, not like classical Rome with the mythology, but Christian Rome when Constantine was in charge. So he is going to try and emulate Constantine in everything inside. That's Carolingian art in the Carolingian era, which he named. Yeah. Of course, he is a Christian king because he's trying to be Constantine, who was, well, the person that legalizes Christianity. To really assert his authority, he does, of course, well, have this made, but also has a bunch of churches built, which we're going to be talking about in a second. But here we have the equestrian statue. If you remember Marcus Aurelius's equestrian statue, you remember when that was found, people thought it was Constantine? Yeah, you're seeing where I'm going with this. Yeah, so when that statue was found, Charlemagne actually had it brought to, well, Germany is where his home empire base was. He had that statue taken there, thinking that it was Constantine, and he wanted his own version of it made of himself. Yeah, he's trying to be Constantine, guys. Like the reincarnated version of Constantine. Instead of course, Marcus Aurelius, he was like standing on top of a person that was down here and carrying, well, he didn't carry anything, but his hand was up in the air in kind of that commanding pose. Instead of that, Charlemagne does have himself holding an orb. It used to have a little cross at the top. If you remember back to images of Constantine, he carried that orb as like a symbol of the founder of the Christian church and ruler of Rome, kind of thing. So doing the same thing. Similarly, also to Marcus Aurelius's statue, he's bigger than the horse. Yeah. Also cartoonish. Like the other one was classic Roman, high Roman Empire art. It was realistic. Other than Marcus Aurelius was huge. He's not. The horse looks more realistic than he does. Like there's more detail to that horse than his face. He is not wearing armor like Marcus Aurelius. He's wearing his parade clothes. So the kings would go on parade down the streets on occasion. Yeah. He's wearing his robe and crown for that particular procession. So what do you guys think of this one? Why?
No, it's like a basic New Age bronze statue that anyone can make.
It looks fine, but I have a standard. No,
Anyone
I like
else?
the Marcus Aurelius one. But also I'm a fan of it.
Like someone, the artist, like took the old statue and then took a piece of paper and like held it to, you know, like when you
Sketch
trace
it
on
out.
the window
Tracing
with
it.
the white, yeah,
Yeah.
and like, but just did the
Yeah.
there out loud.
Yeah, what do you guys think of the image that he's portraying here versus the Marcus Aurelius statue?
More of a one.
He does look more wimpy, yeah. So the
Yeah,
Marcus Aurelius one, he's literally, his horse is about to stomp someone to death.
Yeah.
And he's in a very commanding pose. This one, he's just walking down the street. I'm gonna go parade, yeah, exactly. So there's a different tone here, but it's also a different time.
Yeah.
So Marcus Aurelius was someone that led conquests and fought. This guy is living in a time of peace.
And
There's not, that's not happening. So yeah, it's a bit different. Kind of interesting to think. One of these days I'll think to put the two images next to each other and make you guys like write an essay on them or something. Not in this class, you don't have to do that. Later classes.
I wouldn't be opposed.
Yeah, it's not a bad
Be
one.
opposed.
Yeah,
Extra
it's not a bad
credit.
one.
Exactly.
But yeah. Oh, it has his nickname on here too, Charles the Bald. He wasn't actually bald, but yeah, it's fun. There's also a Richard the Bald that comes up later on in history. They aren't bald, it's just a name. And they didn't used to think of like bald as bald. Yeah. It was like a land title. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, this one's also not nearly as big as Marcus Aurelius's. Marcus Aurelius's was like life size. This one's only 9.5 inches, so it's small. It's like a paperweight. Now, we aren't done with illuminated texts. I told you we weren't. This is another St. Matthew. Very different St. Matthew. This one is from the Holy Roman Empire. The last one was from Hiberno-Saxon. Very, very different. This one is done more in a classical style versus the other one that was trying to incorporate those traditional cultural motifs. This one is trying to revive Roman style classical art. Because remember, Charlemagne wants to make the new Rome. This is the attempt at it. So here we have St. Matthew, once again in that same pose. He's sitting on a stool, hunched over with a stylus and book. Behind him is a very large halo. He is small on the paper, and all around is that magenta dyed vellum. The text and a lot of the areas that look yellow are actual gold. The entire book, Coronation Gospels, was written in gold ink. It was a very expensive book that Charlemagne himself commissioned for himself. Yeah. So we see a lot more natural looking figure. He actually has like shading on him to show features, which the last illuminated manuscript that we talked about did not do. This one always reminds me of like the Pompeii style too, because he looks small on that paper, but that might just be me. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it's pretty cool.
I like the last
I
one
think-
for the colors,
It's all made out, written out of gold.
but I like this one for the realism. I mean, it's not super realistic, but there's an attempt.
Yeah, I mean, it did pretty well.
Oh, there's another one yet.
No, I feel like it's kind of
Yeah.
ironic.
Yeah. Waste of gold.
Yeah.
Gold. Here's another St. Matthew. This is the Ebo or Ebo Gospels, depending on how you say it. I always said Ebo. This one's from France, also part of the Holy Roman Empire under Charlemagne. This is a very, very different version of Matthew, though. During towards the end of the Carolingian Empire, not really end, but towards the end of Charlemagne's reign of the Carolingian Empire, or era, his son takes over and then it kind of just switches after that. But towards the end, they switch from classical style to, well, copying pretty much what the Hiberno-Saxons were doing nearby, which you can kind of see happening. What do you think?
Kind of looks like one of those, you can go buy a Hobby Lobby with scrapes. With a little scraper to
Oh,
make your
yeah,
picture.
yeah. Yeah,
Kind of just reminds me of like a foil.
yeah.
scrape.
I could see that.
You can tell
What?
flat it is.
Yeah, you can see the flatness, especially with all these folds and all the other lines. They're very bold, direct lines, especially in comparison to this one, smooth texture. It has a tone though, and what is that tone?
I mean, personally, he looks like he's like.
Yeah, the tone is frantic stress. That's the point.
Yeah, it looks like marble.
He is to be shown stressed out, like he's trying to ferociously write this down as quickly as possible as he is hearing God's word, which is also why he has a little ink jar there. He's legit holding onto the ink jar, writing as fast as I can, and that's echoed in the actual frame of this paper as well. So quite a bit different than the last one, which has a tone that is more of like a Greek classical style. He doesn't really have an expression. Quite a bit different there. This is like my students in my art appreciation class probably were on Sunday night when they had to finish their gallery report. I had like 5 of them today ask me if they could turn it in late. Did you already turn in something late this 6 weeks? No. Well, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And yeah, you can't. Okay. Don't make me wait forever. I got other stuff to do. Some more books. This one's quite a bit different though. We aren't looking at the page, we're looking at the cover of the Lindau Gospels. A lot of these books, especially ones commissioned by like Charlemagne, were decked out to the nines with the book covers. So this one is gold. It's a sheet of gold with precious and semi-precious stones outside. It is using the repoussé technique. I think we've talked about it in this class before. It's where you get a sheet of metal and beat it from behind to create these images. So of course the central figure is Christ on the cross. I always thought it was interesting because normally Christ would be higher up and not have his feet touching the ground, but this one does not do that. There are angels on top, and then down below are some allegories of the sun and the moon and Mary and John. They're kind of squished down here. They're literally supposed to look squished. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. It was supposed to evoke heavenly Jerusalem with all of its richness. But you guys are kind of understanding with these illuminated manuscripts, it's opulent. They aren't just a basic book. To commission someone to make these, you would need a lot of money. Which also hits on the fact that normal people couldn't own portions of the Bible. That's going to be an issue if you are interested in history later on. If you're not interested in history, then don't worry about it. You won't learn about it in this class anyway. Okay, that does take us into architecture. Like I mentioned earlier, Charlemagne does commission a lot of churches, such as Aachen, which was, well, one of the main churches that he particularly attended. And it's the one we're going to look at today. I am going to play the video so that we can see the exterior and interior rather than just pictures. Actually, like see it, and it is still functioning, so we are going to see it. Never mind, or not. There we go. Let's watch it. That's the other thing is your book and the pictures don't actually mention the octagon. Do you guys remember the last thing we talked about? We used an octagon. It was yesterday, wasn't that long? Mosques. Some of the mosques do use octagons. Yeah. Different kind of dome though. It's very high up and sloping in comparison to the mosque domes that we looked at yesterday, which were a lot flatter. This does make it a lot more structurally sound, and Charles the Great, that's another nickname for Charlemagne. Let you know. It's still used today. That is all gold. So also he would actually sit up here in the galley on the second floor and watch the service. He did not sit on the ground floor. He and his family sat up there. So this is a 2-level building, but the upper level was reserved for royalty. For them, not for everyone. For them, not for And I think we grasped that. He's not the first person to do that. But I did like this is a very dull video. It's also very short. But I liked the fact that they talked about the different aspects that he demanded be put into his church and why, because your book doesn't touch on that at all. I will rewind a little bit though, because there's a couple of things. First off, here we have Roman arches being incorporated, not the horseshoe kind like the Islamic. Theirs were slightly more skinny, like a horseshoe and a little bit rounder. Roman arches, of course, your basic arch. Piers, foam marble is being used to decorate, once again, to try and emphasize Rome. But this is one of the earlier churches that does have two stories. That upper story is called a gallery. That's going to be pretty common for the rest of the churches that we're going to look at in this class. Though later on, it is not used just by the royal family. It's used by a lot of people as like an overflow area. But yeah, that's why that one. So, Aachen, of course, the main church that Charlemagne used and the one that he commissioned. He did not just commission that one, there were more. He also commissioned the monastery of St. Gall to take place. St. Gall, well, first off, do you guys know what a monastery is? What is it?
It's like a church. I mean,
More than that.
it's more so a prayer area.
More than that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's only
Like
for
continuous worship.
So early on, I keep saying early on, but like when Christianity is spreading into Europe, there's this idea that the monks and the nuns, to preserve their purity and not be tempted by sin, they need to remove themselves from society. Therefore, they choose to live in monasteries, which are separate from, well, everyone else in secluded areas. Inside those monasteries, they would have everything they might ever possibly need. There's a farm, there's a livestock area, there's a cafeteria, there are rooms and housing, there's a kitchen area. And then, of course, there's also their own church. The monastery of St. Gall is one of the early examples of a monastery, which incorporates all of those aspects. You can already kind of see the church itself right here, which is a basic basilica with two semicircles on each end. And then, of course, all of the other buildings are designed around that. This is the basic idea of a Benedictine monastery, and it will be used by most other, what are those guys called? Claire? No. No. The type of, like, okay, so there's more than just the Benedictine monks. There's a bunch of different orders. Orders of monks and nuns. This will be the typical plan for them to use. The church did include a transept, which we'll look at in a second, and two towers. You can see the towers here. You can kind of see the transept here. It crosses. Transepts were added originally to house relics. Later on, transepts they'll be a lot bigger to allow room for, well, tourism in the form of pilgrimages. But early on, they were a bit smaller, as people didn't actually like go see them quite as much then. So, oops. Instead of St. Gall, because St. Gall isn't actually around anymore. We have Corvey, which does have two towers to showcase that they are incorporating towers, but they are actually usually attached to the church itself. So this one does have the towers attached. I know they don't look like they're attached, but they are. This is considered a westward church, meaning that you enter from one end and walk in, and like the aisles there.
Mm-hmm.
Remember last week I mentioned that the early churches had you entering from, well, the long side. The westward church has you entering from the short side. Gothic cathedrals will have several entrances, but we'll get there when we get there. You can see this is a quite plain church. That's how it starts off. Get more complex once again as we go on. That takes us into the Ottonian Empire. So, like I mentioned, Charlemagne, he will die. His son will take over for a brief bit. He rules for a total of 46 years. His sons end up splitting up the empire when he dies because that worked so well for Rome. Yeah. Two of those territories that are owned by the three sons do eventually end up becoming France and Germany, but not for a long time. And the other region is kind of like part of Spain and Italy, but yeah, not for a long time. The region did suffer after the split, obviously. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out, because of Viking and Muslim invasions into the different regions. Duh, you have the Vikings coming down from the north, Muslims coming in from the south. You're all divided now. You don't have that giant empire now. This does lead to, well, Charlemagne's son as well, not lasting too long. And who takes over? The Ottos. Otto the First, Otto the Second, Otto the Third, and Henry the Second. Why Henry? I don't know. Which is why it's called the Ottonian. Yeah. That's how they get their name. Poor Henry, he's just there. Like, I'm part of this, but my name's not Otto. They pretty much carry on what Charlemagne tried to do, which was make the new Rome, and his sons kind of screwed that up. But they try and pick it back up again. We have a lot more churches, more illuminated manuscripts, and some sculptures. One sculpture. We don't have too many sculptures from this time period. And fun fact, the Ottonian Empire is the last one we're talking about today. We're almost done, but not really, because there's a lot. It's the main trick. Otto the First had the longest reign. Otto the Second, Otto the Third, not as long. Henry II has some stuff too. But most of this is going to come from Otto the First. With more churches. Gernrode. This is Otto the First's attempts to be as much like Charlemagne as possible by, well, commissioning more churches to be made. Gernrode Church has two towers, like some of the churches that were made, well, when Charlemagne was in charge of the two towers on the front with a westward. He incorporated a gallery. The gallery was not just for him, though. It was for everyone, and a clear story. So now instead of a two-level church like the last one we looked at Aachen, we have a three-level church. They're getting taller. They're going to get taller and taller and taller. That's how it works. This church does have a wooden roof. That'll change later because of fires. The roof is painted, in case you're curious. The original glass on these windows was clear. Now there's a little bit of stained glass today. And of course, you have your nave, which is the central section, and an aisle on each side, which is what's on the other side of these little arches and columns. There's alternation between Corinthian style columns and piers in between every single one. Here's, of course, the thick blocks. They are the ones that are actually doing the brunt of the work, and then the columns as well. There are decorations underneath the arches of geometric patterns. And of course, the altar piece is painted. Well, altar, not altarpiece, altar itself. The apse. There you go. It's painted. So it's at this point, the real big thing for this one is that clear story. That clear story is that row of windows. The last time we saw it was Hagia Sophia. The clear story was used around the dome to make the dome look like it was floating. This obviously did not have that effect, but it does allow light to come into the otherwise very dark building. Electricity was not a thing. You can also understand why fire might be an issue, and why it was probably pretty frequent. After this point on, people will just naturally include clear stories because it makes sense to have light. Another church, Hildesheim. This is a church dedicated for St. Michael. It also has 2 transept towers. This is obviously not a front entrance church though. This one has side entrances, as you can see here. It is a plain rectangular building. It also has a really large tower where the apse crosses and, well, not where the apse crosses, but right next to the apse, and then the transept crosses the nave. At the center of that area where that square takes place, there is that thick tower. And of course, I didn't mention this. I think I mentioned it a long time ago, but they add transepts crossing the nave because, well, it holds the relics, but it also looks like a cross. They too incorporated alternating piers and columns. And well, it has a design that makes it look like it's separated into 3 units. And I think I have a plan. Yes, I did. Okay. So we have a square, a square, a square, a square, a square, a square, and square, 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 square. Very proportional in the form of squares. It's like someone took building blocks as a kid and built it. The interior is not quite as plain though. The ceiling is also wooden and painted. Wooden ceilings are going to be the norm for this era. They didn't know how to not do wood. Also, a clear story, this one does not have a gallery above. It just has the main floor area, which has the nave and an aisle on each side. Later on, large churches are going to incorporate more than 1 aisle on each side. And for anyone that's still confused, the center area is the nave, and the 2 side areas are the aisles. It seems a bit confusing to us today because in our churches, it's like the opposite. The aisle is the row down the center, and then the nave is the place where people sit. It's the opposite here. But still your basic square basilica format. Just got some extras. And that does take us to the Hildesheim doors. On the doors of this building, on one of the doors of this building, are these bronze cast relief sculptures. They are quite extremely impressive because each door was cast at one time. Meaning that these are not separate relief sculptures. All one. I can only imagine how many tries it took to practice getting all of these correct. These figures are very much in a classical style, well, not like classical as in realistic, but classical in, like, if you remember back to the metopes of the Parthenon, as in some of them are very high relief, sticking out very far, almost in the round, but not quite. And the scenes itself do depict the story of Genesis on the left and the story of the life of Jesus on the right. It is read in a very interesting manner. So up at the top on the left here, you have Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden. Well, actually, this is where they're eating. It's around here. This one's the one they're expelled from the garden. So they're eating the fruit up here, expelled from the garden here. Down at the bottom, you have Cain and Abel, well, fighting. And then the story picks back up over here with the Annunciation of Christ. And right here, you have Christ's crucifixion. It is exactly juxtaposed to Adam and Eve leaving the garden. So when humanity falls and enters into sin, and the one who raises them out of sin, right next to each other. It's designed like that. And then at the very end is Christ leaving the tomb. So it's a very interesting composition. We don't know who did it. It was commissioned by Bishop Bernward, in case you care. You don't need to know who commissioned them. There's a lot of bishops that are commissioning a lot of different things in this time period to show off their wealth. But interesting doors, not the only doors that we're going to come across, which is why I spent so much time talking about them. My art history professor a long time ago used to make me write an essay comparing all 3 sets of doors that we study in the class. Because there are 3. Anyways, here's a close-up of God, kicking Adam and Eve out of the garden. I hate this one. This is just a personal feeling. Personal. But you can kind of see here how the figures, they aren't like in the classical stylism realistic, but you can see they're very rounded out as far as a bronze cast, which is why I think it's really impressive. But here's God. He is pointing to Eve. Actually, no, this is Adam. He's pointing at Adam and saying, how dare you eat the fruit? And then Adam's pointing to Eve, saying it was her fault. And then Eve's pointing down at the snake, saying, no, it's his fault. So everyone's just placing blame on everyone else. Like literally, there's gestures. The gestures are being used here to indicate a story. This is the first time we're going to look at in Christian art the importance of gestures. From this point on, gestures are going to carry a lot of weight and meaning with Christian art, helping the narrative along. Also, sometimes it's just gesture for the sake of gesture. Yeah. Here's another example of some not paintings from books. We'll get there. These are the ivories of Magdeburg. There was a set of probably 50 at one point. There's only 16 left. This is the most famous of the 16, which shows Christ at the center, sitting on top of the world as Panto Creator, and around him are saints. So St. Peter's over here holding the key, and yes, I did have to write notes because there's no way I was going to remember all these dudes' names. St. Mauritius, who I'd never heard of before. Well, I mean, the last time I learned about this, I heard about him, but I don't know who he is or what he did. Anyways, he is presenting Otto the First, you know, the emperor, to Christ, and Otto is carrying with him Magdeburg Cathedral's little schematic. The last time we saw something like this was San Vitale, with the bishop who took over that church, presenting the church to God in like a teeny tiny dollhouse format. We're seeing it again here. However, Otto the First chose to be represented as a very small, he looks like a child here, to show that he considers himself to be less important than God or the saints. So really showing off his place. In the past, when we've looked at some of the emperors and rulers, they don't choose to do that. I mean, you remember Justinian, he wanted to have a halo behind him because he was emperor. So Otto the First, he knew his place in the world. I don't know, maybe, maybe not. He didn't force the Pope to crown him. So, who knows? Now, on to Otto II. Like I said, he doesn't live too long. So Otto I had a son, Otto II. Surprise, surprise. This is a very, very brief history, and I did get sarcastic here too, so I'm going to apologize there. Otto I had Otto II, his son, marry the daughter of the ruler of Byzantium, trying to merge the two empires back together again into like Rome. It was a good plan. Her name was Theophanu. Otto II died 10 years after taking over from his dad, so not a super long reign. And his son, Otto III, was only 3 at the time, so Theophano actually was regent until Otto III was old enough to rule. She was co-regent with Otto II's mom, Adelaide. Yeah. Family. Anyway, that's why I wrote that down. But here we have an image that was made in celebration of, well, the two countries uniting, the Holy Roman Empire and Byzantium. Over here you have Otto II, also looks like a very small child. He wasn't a child, he was a grown man. And Theophano over here also looks like a small child, was not a child. Well, probably young. Women married young then. And in between them is Christ anointing them and kind of blessing the marriage. Also on ivory. Yeah, interesting. But that's it for Otto II because he died. Yeah, fun stuff. And here we have the Gero crucifix, which was commissioned by Otto III. Otto III was very devout to his faith. Super Christian. Super Christian. And he wanted his reign to reflect that. So, yeah, more churches, more Christian art. Not too different, really. But he did have the Garo crucifix commissioned. This is the largest form of sculpture that we've talked about since entering into the Middle Ages era. It is wooden. It is covered in gold paint. It is located in the Cologne Cathedral, which means that I have been there and seen it, and I don't remember it. Because I was not looking at that. I was looking at something else. I'd known. No. I went to the Cologne Cathedral to look at the rose window, which was done by a contemporary artist after World War II. The windows were blown out, bombing. So all of the stained glass was redone by a contemporary artist. I went to see that. I did not pay attention to this. But this is at the altar. It's there. He used to have a crown of thorns on his head. You can kind of see the blood streaming down from that. That has been lost. He is nailed to the cross. There's blood kind of coming out in certain areas. He does look kind of like dead, lifeless at this point. Not your peaceful, happy version of Christ. Some of the versions of Christ on the cross that we've looked at so far, he looked peaceful. So not that version. But this will, of course, later on become Germany, hence Cologne Cathedral. German art is known for emotion and, well, vividness. This is an early precursor to that. It'll get extreme on Thursday. Yeah. Some more Otto III, the Gospel book of Otto III, he too had illuminations made of him. Celebrating him being a Christian ruler. Once again, we have the orb and staff and crown. He is definitely being shown as king here. He was so obsessed with really being like Charlemagne. Now everyone wants to be like Charlemagne and be super devout Christian that he has the capital of the Holy Roman Empire moved back to Rome, and his whole court moved there. It didn't work out. He ended up dying really shortly after that at age 21. So, yeah, but here's an image of him surrounded by, well, the bishops and leaders of the church and the leaders of his land of state. So church and state. And that's it for Otto III, which takes us to Henry II, and we're almost done, which is good because there's only 6 minutes. And we're ending with the lectionary of Henry II. Henry II continued on with the Ottonian Empire and the spreading of Christianity, also using illuminated manuscripts. Here we see that he was fusing Charlemagne's Carolingian and Ottonian narrative elements in with late antiquity style art. If you remember back to late antiquity, the mosaics. Does anyone remember the color of the mosaic backgrounds? Gold. Yes, so here we have that again. So really a fusion of all of that. Still very flat. Repetitive patterns in the fold, repetitive patterns in the land. It's not realistic looking. There is a hole in this, which is sad, and it used to be folded up. So sad. A gold piece of paper, you're gonna fold it. Anyway. That's it. In summary, some traditional motifs of the warlords. Does anyone remember some of the traditional motifs? Zoomorphic animals and organic shapes and patterns, yes. And Hiberno-Saxon art, they fuse what two things together?
Well,
Christian and
Pagan.
pagan. Very good. And it was trying to accomplish what? Yes. These are very basic
They
questions.
exist.
Yeah. And then what would you say led up to the art styles produced during the Carolingian Ottonian Empire era? It's a little bit more complicated. It's a fusion of a few different things.
In a college of various like elements, you have Roman architecture and styles and
You have some Roman, you have some late antiquity, you have some Byzantium. It's a fusion of anything that they can claim as Christian, really. Yeah. So it's an interesting one. Tomorrow we get to continue on with some more churches and illuminated manuscripts, just from a different era, the Romanesque period, which I'm sure you can tell from the name, is Romanesque. Yeah, fun one. Remember, you guys have that paper to work on. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. But yeah, you guys are free to go today. Tomorrow's going to be a short day because I don't like Romanesque. It's really just more churches and more illuminated manuscripts. It doesn't change too much. It's just the Ottonians aren't in charge anymore. That's pretty much it.
But then you get Gothic and I used to hate Gothic, people are finally appreciating it.
I like Gothic aesthetically.
I like it aesthetically, but I don't like all of the vocabulary and we're not sure that comes along with it.
Because they had a name for everything. Every piece of architecture has a name. I keep having to make diagrams for that particular lecture to help get the names across.